Assalamu alaikum viewers, a very warm welcome to all of you watching Hidayat TV. I'm Haider with another episode of Generation Gap. Viewers, 12 years have gone past since 9/11. Colin Powell made a very powerful speech regarding weapons of mass destruction in those times, and now Senator John Kerry has made a similar speech claiming that Bashar al-Assad has used chemical weapons on August 21st, killing almost 1,400 people. Today we will be talking again to Dr. Hidayat. We have spoken to her in the past, and then we were wishing that there would be a political solution, so we might have to reconvene here. And also Stephen Linman from Chicago, who will be joining us. Raza Naeem will be talking, social scientist based in Pakistan. We will be talking to him as well. And Binish Javed, the roving journalist based in Pakistan but currently in Germany. So we will talk to these people and see that what is their understanding of the conflict and where it is all leading. Let me introduce the panel. We are joined by Stephen Linman from Chicago, radio presenter for Progressive Radio Network, and he's also served in US Army, and he writes on major world and national issues. Thank you very much for joining us, Stephen. Stephen, your thoughts, what's exactly happening behind closed doors in the United States?
Well, Saeed, it's a pleasure to be on with you. I can't tell you what's going on behind closed doors because they don't invite me to their policy-making meetings, but I understand exactly what's going on. I've been on the Syria story on a daily basis, Saeed. Yesterday and today, I wrote 3 articles on Syria each day. For the last several weeks, I've written at least 2 articles on Syria every single day. So during August through 2 days in September, I have enough material on Syria, I would say to fill maybe 2 books, not 1 book. And I understand exactly what's going on. The issue in Syria comes down to this. Syria is a sovereign, independent country. It's not controlled by the West. It's certainly not controlled by Washington. It's a regional rival of Israel. Israel wants to be the regional hegemon. Washington wants to be the global hegemon. Washington wants the regional resources exploited. It wants to get rid of all the rival states. The key is less Syria, Saeed, and more Iran. And a line I've used a number of times is, the road to Tehran runs through Damascus. If you can topple the Assad government, you will weaken and put in a pro-Western puppet government. You isolate Iran, you weaken Iran, you make it easier for America to target Iran. There have been war plans on the books against Iran for many years. Whether they'll be implemented or not, I don't know. Certainly there have been plans to attack Syria, and at the same time, in an article that I'll put out tomorrow, I'll explain that in 2008, there were talks between Washington and Syria. Who led the talks? 2008. Obama was a presidential candidate. The talks were led by the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. I think a name you'll recognize.
Senator is John Kerry.
John Kerry.
Okay.
He made his 3rd trip to Syria since 2000. He spoke directly with Assad. He talked about peace and rapprochement. There were negotiations going on with Israel with regard to the Golan Heights. And Syria absolutely considers the Golan sovereign Syrian territory. At the same time, and Assad asserted this point, and he's right, of course, but he also said all things are negotiable, so we can negotiate water, and we can negotiate other things, but you cannot negotiate the fact that Golan is Syrian territory. Well, things were going along pretty well, even after Assad made a very hostile comment about Israel, a very justifiable comment, after the December 2008, January 2009 caste-led war. And he said Israel speaks the language of blood. Indeed so.
So it's more about I would say that controlling Iran through Damascus, that's what you see is happening in the future?
The issue is weakening Iran by toppling the Assad government. That's the key. Syria is a less important government for Israel and for America, even though Syria, of course, borders on Israel. And yet, if Israel was negotiating a possible peace in 2008, it shows that peace between Israel and Syria is indeed possible, mainly because Assad was very willing to come up with an agreement, and it spent a year in 2008 negotiating both countries, and a lot of major issues were resolved. It showed that they were both serious about peace. And yet look what's going on now. Israel is partnered with Washington, with France, with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, with Jordan against Syria. Israel is part of the war against Syria.
So,
and yet in 2008, it was willing to go all the way, apparently, for peace.
So do you think that America will be invading Syria? Is it about to happen?
No, I don't think there'll be an invasion, but we'll have what Obama calls token strikes. They're not token strikes, Saeed. I call them what they are. There are 5 U.S. destroyers.
Yeah.
Each all put together, I don't know how many cruise missiles they carry in total, but I saw one report that said they carry 300 each. I saw another report that said they carry 90. Let's say combined 5. They carry hundreds of cruise missiles. They're very, very powerful munitions. They commit very, very severe destruction. And they unleash these missiles on Syria. Well, they're picking out sites to attack. They want to attack strategic sites, military-related strikes, infrastructure sites that can harm Syria and make it easier for America to wage war. And supposedly these strikes will go on for 2 or 3 days. But let's call these strikes what they are, Saeed. They're not token, they're shock and awe. That's what they are. Thousands of Syrians may be killed.
What role Russia will be playing?
Russia, I'm sorry. Russia is doing some of the right things. I'm waiting for Vladimir Putin to say something. He finally did. He was very forthright. He called the so-called evidence that Washington has that Syria used chemical weapons utter nonsense, quote unquote.
Yes.
Nonsense. I've written about this. I'm more blunt than Putin is. Putin is pretty blunt. Prime Minister Medvedev is a little bit more political. Foreign Minister Lavrov, a little bit more political.
Yes,
but basically they say the same things I do. Saying Syria was responsible for using chemical weapons is a bald-faced lie. That's the kind of language I use, i.e.
Okay, let me interrupt you. We're joined by Dr. Hala Diab from Leicester, and we'll be talking. Dr. Hala, we have spoken. Welcome to the show, first of all.
Thank you.
We have spoken a few weeks ago that what was about to happen in Syria. How are you taking these events unfolding in Syria?
The American decision to intervene militarily on Syria has to be looked at about the objectives of Obama for this military intervention. Is he trying through this military intervention to punish Bashar al-Assad for using the chemical weapon, or to get rid of Bashar al-Assad and topple the regime? If it's his first objective to punish Bashar, he should have tangible evidence that the government and the regime has used chemical weapon. Unfortunately, the UN, as they stated, their mandate is just to prove whether this chemical weapon has been used, but not who used them. And this is not for the benefit of the Syrian people, because Syrian people have a right to know who committed the atrocities and this criminal act against their children and against their mothers. Not if this act has happened or not. It has happened because we have victims on the ground. And the international community is doing less on finding solutions and helping Syrian people. And military intervention of United States is not serving Syrian people as per se by the American regime or the American government. It's serving Obama's interest and fear that this chemical weapon might fall in the hands of Jabhat al-Nusra and Al-Qaeda group and might threaten the West. And diminishing the interest of Syrian people.
But don't you think they fought against Al-Qaeda for the last 10-12 years, and now they will be joining the battle and fighting Bashar al-Assad on the same front? I mean, Al-Qaeda is fighting Bashar al-Assad already. And why now?
Of course, they are part of the military opposition on the ground are affiliated by Al-Qaeda group, Jabhat al-Nusra. And unfortunately, because these extremists who use Islamic ideology to promote, to do their PR among the Muslim youth and to bring thousands of Muslim youth from around the world, they are winning on the ground among young people. And sending troops and bombing these people will not kill the ideology of terrorism and the ideology of extremism. America has proved the futility of its military intervention in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we end up with more terrorism on the ground. And the only way for fighting terrorism in Syria is first to find peace, to find political solution, to join efforts to contain this violence, and also to find those who are involved in armed fight on the ground, whether they will be part of the political solution in the future or not. They will maintain using violence as force of change.
But you know, Dr. Hala, when you say political solution, we have seen it in the past. More than 100,000 people have killed, 200,000 been displaced. There's no political solution on the table. There's no, if we even talk about transition, there is no transitional leader available in Syria, I would say.
Because they are not serious about the political solution. They're supposed to be politicians. They call themselves politicians, yet they are incapable of finding political solution to save the people who they want to rule, to serve the people who they want to represent in the future. And this futility of the Syrian opposition is due to its fragmented, it is divided, it doesn't have a defined ideologies. Also, it is very sectarian. There is sectarian division between Syrian opposition, and also because this opposition is not empowered by the will of people. This opposition is empowered by the money which is given to them by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, in order to promote the Salafism, Sunni Salafism in the Levant.
But I mean, what I don't understand that why Prince Bandar has gone to, I mean, it's been alleged that he's gone to Russia. Allegedly, he offered $15 billion to Russian President Vladimir Putin, and then he is rallying around in the world, lobbying for a military intervention in Syria. What sort of benefits Saudi Arabia will be getting it from?
Prince Bandar, he's always been this prince in the shadow who tried to bribe people and leaders to achieve the political agenda of Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, if they have no right to open their mouth against Syria. Saudi Arabia is a mafia ruled by a privileged family. And even they call Saudi Arabia, which used to be called Arabia, after their founder, King Saud. They think they own Saudi Arabia and the people who are on Saudi Arabia, and they want to empower Wahhabism and Salafism in the Levant. Because the continuity of Salafism is the continuity of Saudi Arabia as a government, as a kingdom. And they are also threatened by Shia presence in the Levant, yet so they are trying to weaken Syria. They want Syria to be an Islamic state. They want Syria to be divided. They want to kill the secularism, the freedom, the moderate Islam in Syria that we have been brought on in Syria. And it is very shocking that an Arab country, which is supposed to stand by another Arab country, is trying to liaise with other Western countries to wage war on its neighboring country.
Okay, let me bring in Stephen. Just stay with for another moment. Stephen, this is a very open-ended question, that there are so many benefits for Saudi Arabia while in getting involved in this conflict. But what is your perspective on that?
Well, whether there's been any bad blood between Saudi Arabia and the Syrian government over the years, I honestly don't know. But the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Bahrain, UAE, these are brutal dictatorships. Brutal dictatorships. They have no credibility whatsoever. I think what they're concerned about is, on the one hand, this was definitely the situation with regard to Egypt. Saudi Arabia is very concerned that there'll be an Arab Spring in the kingdom, and maybe they'll face opposition that could lead to them being deposed. So they very much want to put down any roots that might indicate that this could erupt. A bigger issue for me is exactly, aside from Saudi Arabia, and there's no question that Prince Bandar is very much involved in these horrible crimes going on. Saudi Arabia has provided chemical agents, toxic agents, to the extremist elements in Syria. On the one hand, Assad had nothing to do with the August 21st attack in Ghouta. Assad had nothing to do with using chemical weapons any time since conflict began in March 2011. There's irrefutable proof that the so-called rebels, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, other extremists, have been armed, have been trained in these weapons. Pentagon contractors, CNN, of all services, reported this, that Pentagon contractors trained these extremist fighters in the handling of chemical weapons. Handling means use of them. They know the use of them. They have chemical agents. Prince Bandar is supplying them. They were responsible for the Ghouta attack. They've been responsible for other attacks. Turkey, last year, I forget the date, it might have been around May, captured 12 Al-Nusra fighters. They were captured with 2 grams of sarin nerve gas. The story broke. It died very quickly. Well, we know what the story is.
I mean, even the United Nations director was present at that time. She acknowledged that as well, that there was chemical. Okay, Dr. Haider, before you go, last question. Obviously, Prime Minister Cameron has been defeated in the Commons, and humiliating defeat. Do you see it happening in Congress in the United States?
There is a possibility that's going to happen because also American politicians are, and this is not very clear what is going to happen, whether the Congress approves or not.
Okay. So, I mean, what are your thoughts? What final questions? That what will be happening in the next few weeks in Syria?
My hope is that the Congression appeal, or the Congress will vote against Obama military intervention, and that can create a kind of hesitation in Obama, and then maybe he will push for political solution in G20 next week. And with some pressure on Russia and Iran, there will be some pressure on the opposition and on the government to come together and come up with a compromised political solution.
Okay, and do you see it happening, or is it just wishful thinking?
I think that there are potentials for this thing to happen, but I think the Western community is not working hard enough for this to happen. They work harder on fast solutions, military solution. They want to deal with the symptoms. They don't want to deal with the problem. And I think if the international community provided the same efforts and time they are providing for waging war against Syria to find political solution, I am sure and I'm confident that we can bring peace to Syria again.
Okay, our wishes and prayers are with the people of Syria and yourself, Dr. Haider. Thank you very much for joining us. Okay, Stephen, coming back to this Western interest in the region, I mean, what do you make of it? Obviously, you have seen, you've been writing for a long time. What do you think, where fundamentally U.S. foreign policy is going wrong or has been going wrong?
Well, I have to say this. I think the chance for a political solution is close to zero, Saeed. Close to zero. The war against Syria is Washington's war. I've said it many times. It was planned many years ago, at least back to the beginning of the new millennium, and I believe in the 1990s. And if I had to name a culprit, it would be Paul Wolfowitz, who was in the first Bush administration. He was in the second Bush administration. They want a sovereign Syria removed. They want a puppet state replacing Syria. And this war was planned. Oh, it's Obama's war now. And I don't think there's any chance that there'll be a political solution. Look, we had Geneva 1 in June last year. Russia has gone all out for a Geneva 2. Washington has gone all out to assure there'll be no Geneva 2. And if there is a Geneva 2, it'll fail like Geneva 1. Why? Because Washington wants war. It deplores a political solution. And that's exactly what I see coming. Assad is waging a lonely battle, trying to save his country. I support him. Everybody should support him. He's got a very tough fight ahead of him. He'll fight valiantly. The Syrian people support him overwhelmingly, but I really see a bad outcome to this. And no matter how it turns out, Saeed, there'll be many thousands more dying. There'll be much more destruction taking place. It's a horrible situation. And if we want to see the analog, just look at what's happening in Afghanistan, in Iraq today, in Libya today. The same thing is happening in Syria. Syria will be turned into a greater charnel house than it is already. There'll be much greater violence. This could go on for years, Saeed.
Okay, Stevens, we are joined by Raza Naeem from Pakistan, and he's a Pakistani social scientist, but he's been involved in, he's been writing a lot on the Middle East. University of Leeds graduate. Assalamu alaikum, Raza.
Walaikum assalam.
Thank you very much for joining us, Raza. Raza, give us your thoughts that what is about to happen in Syria.
I think I was listening to your other guest. I think it's Stephen Landman, as if I'm correct.
Yes, you are.
And unfortunately, I think the United States has, I think, in principle, decided to go to war even before the United Nations weapons inspectors have been, have really, I mean, they have left Damascus, but they have not yet given their verdict. And I think using Congress as a fig leaf isn't really going to help. And also, what's not going to help is the fact that the United Kingdom, which is usually a poodle to United States imperial foreign policy, their parliament has just defeated an attempt by their elite to wage a war on behalf of the United States. That's not going to help either. I mean, France has just said that, they have, somehow managed to procure some evidence that, the Bashar Assad regime is killing its own people, and they seem pretty much on board. But the big question to ask is, the pattern is very familiar. This excuse of weapons of mass destruction was manufactured before destroying Iraq, and then we knew that in 2004 it was the United States soldiers who were using white phosphorus, and no trace of weapons or chemical weapons was found in Saddam Hussein's arsenal. So, the United States absolutely has zero credibility right now. Their own people are against the war. There is a big public opinion in Europe which is against the war. And yet, unfortunately, it's difficult to see how Obama cannot go to war. I mean, he has been actually pretty consistent. I mean, the one thing in which the Obama administration has been consistent is in war making. You know, even before he was the president, he was saying, I'm going to send drone attacks into Pakistan, my country, and he did that. And ever since that, and getting the Nobel Prize, you know, he has been just waging war on Muslim countries.
I mean, don't you think it's very ironic that he is the Nobel Peace Prize winner, and if you look at the policy of Obama administration since 2008, it is about war making.
Yes, and you know, and I think this will really, you know, peel off the shine of many of our progressive friends in the United States who kept on saying, no, you know, he's a black man in the White House. Please give him some respect. You know, he's still got some veneer of progressivism left in him. I think this really is going to show everybody, you know, what a mistake it was to elect this man as to a second-term president, as president of the United States. And you know, even Cameron looks like a better leader than Obama at the moment, given what his parliament has done to him in the United Kingdom. You know, and I think the Nobel Peace Prize probably has lost all credibility now after this latest episode of war making in Syria.
Okay, just stay with us, Raza and Stephen.
Sure.
Stephen, war making or getting into wars, or that's the policy or the culture of CIA and Pentagon in the United States?
I'm sorry, Saeed, I didn't understand.
Is it the culture in Pentagon that they have to wage a war to sell the arms and get the contracts for its military contractors? Is that the way it's been run, and we've been fooled again and again and again?
Well, we have been fooled again and again, and to some extent it is the Pentagon policy. But the Pentagon will serve the interests of the country. The way generals get more stars is they wage wars and they get decorations. And if they didn't wage wars, if they stayed at home and sat behind a desk, then there'd be less 4-star generals, 3-star generals, 2-star generals. So they need to get their battle experience, and that very definitely gets them stars. On the other hand, as far as Obama goes, I wrote about Obama during the 2008 campaign. It was very easy for me. I went back and looked at his record as an Illinois state senator. It was pretty pathetic, but the real pathetic record was as a U.S. senator. And I wrote about how he voted on issues relating most to corporate empowerment, to war and peace, and to things relating to it. He sounded more like a Republican than many Republicans. I knew what this guy was back then. I knew that we were not getting a rose garden. We were getting a guy who was going to be a clone of George Bush. The only thing I didn't know, Saeed, was that he exceeds the worst of George Bush. And that's no exaggeration. And everything I've written about him alone, I've got it all documented in black and white. And that's no pun. He's a war criminal multiple times over. He wants war on Syria. He wants regime change. These so-called strikes are the first part of his campaign. But the issue with Syria has got nothing to do with token strikes. The issue is regime change. And Obama's war will not stop until Assad is toppled and a puppet government replaces him, and that's what it's all about. And then on to Iran, on to Lebanon and Hezbollah, on to Palestine and Gaza. It goes on and on and on.
So what is, I mean, before we go for a break, Stephen, tell us that what do you see is about to happen in the next 3-4 weeks?
Oh, I think there'll definitely be an attack. I will be absolutely astounded. I think the Congress, there'll be a rousing debate in the Congress. It's not a slam dunk, as we say, because the Republicans will give Obama a lot of trouble, not because they don't support war, but because they'll politic. They'll say, oh, well, McCain, John McCain, Senator McCain, and Lindsey Graham are absolute vicious hawks. They are very much for war, but they want something beyond token strikes. They both said that. They want real shock and awe, the kind of shock and awe that was unleashed against Iraq. So they may go against Obama because they don't want 2 or 3 days. They want a week, they want 2 weeks, they want a month. They want the entire country turned to rubble. That's what they want. They want unlimited bombing. They want authorization to go to war with Syria. No time limit. That's what they want. And if they don't get it, they'll give Obama a rough time. I don't know how they'll vote. They may give him a rough time and then vote for the resolution he wants, or maybe they'll change the language and Obama will go along with the language that they craft, because it still means war and it still means regime change, even though it may not come in September, but it will come. Obama will be on track for it, and the Republicans and Obama will come together. They'll agree on a war, and the war's been raging since March 2011. It's been a proxy war. It'll be a direct U.S. war, and this is exactly what I see happening. The chances of it not happening, Saeed, slim to none.
Okay, thank you very much, Stephen, for your time. We will go for a break, viewers, now, and then we'll come back. We will talk more about the dynamics of this episode in Syria. Welcome back, viewers. We joined by Raza Naeem from Pakistan, and let's talk more about what is happening in Syria and what is about to happen in Syria. Raza, give us your understanding of these key players, starting from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and then going to Bahrain and Russia. What are the stakes?
Well, sorry?
What are the stakes?
Yes, Saudi Arabia has obviously been involved in the Arab Spring since its inception, and I think one obvious reason for that is because kingdoms which have no democracy for decades are loath to supporting democracies at home, what to talk about democracies abroad. And secondly, since the destruction of Iraq and the deposition of Saddam Hussein, the Arab world has actually become convulsed into Sunnis and Shia sectarianism, and obviously Saudi Arabia is a very big part of that. And it's interesting because wherever the Saudis have gone in, before they went in, the demands of the people, whether it was Bahrain or Yemen or Syria, they were united. But the moment the Saudis intervened, it totally, took on a sectarian flavor. And there are books being written about it, how the Arab Spring has now taken on an increasingly sectarian flavor, and it is all thanks to the Saudi intervention. And let me also say that Saudi Arabia is not alone. There is Turkey and also Qatar. And it's interesting because throughout most of the 20th century, at least Turkey and Saudis were never on the same side, because of historical reasons. Turks have, because of their secular history under Ataturk, and obviously Saudi Arabia, its own history as a puritanical Wahhabi state. So, realpolitik does make strange bedfellows, it seems. And, so they
I assume Al-Qaeda and Washington will be joining soon as well, the way things are unfolding in Syria. So Turks and...
They haven't joined. They are already joined since the last 1 year, since the Syrian uprising has taken on a sectarian flavor. It is all thanks to the cash provided by the Saudis and the military and psyops provided by French and the United States and UK. So they have been involved and right through. And one reason for that is not because Syria has oil. It's because Syria is borders Israel, and we would have seen a different treatment had Syria even got one barrel of oil. Just contrast the double standards here on Libya and what is now going on Syria. There were no-fly zones on Libya, and not that I support no-fly zones, but these double standards are clearly for all to see. So this is about Saudi Arabia.
When you say that these double standards are for everyone to see, that, and if we look back now in the history, we see there is a pattern starting from, let's say, Northern Africa, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, and then going all the way closer to Israel, the next, which is Syria, and then and simultaneously happening in Bahrain and Yemen. There is a pattern which is following. They are not taking two fronts at one time and disintegrating one country at one time. So still people can't see.
Well, I think, as I said, since 2004, the destruction of Iraq, Iran has emerged as a major player in the Arab world, and increasingly the Arab world has, as I said before, become divided among Sunnis and Shias, and this is where the role of Russia becomes very important. Because unlike Iraq, Syria is not Iraq. Syria right now has very powerful friends, and they include Russia, they include China, which are the two members of the Security Council who have bravely, I would say, vetoed each and every resolution which has come their way talking about aggression in Syria. And inside the Arab world, they also have one very, very valuable ally, which is Hezbollah, which is the National Resistance Organization in Lebanon, and it bears to repeat that it is to date the only Arab military organization which has actually defeated Israel in combat. No Arab leader actually has that mantle, not even the great Jamal Abdul Nasser. So really, I think I would like to say this: why is this war a so-called limited war? I think it's a limited war because basically the aim of this war is to target Iran. Make absolutely no mistake about it. Syria is just the first stage, and as Stephen Landman was also saying a few moments earlier, the real aim is to surround Iran, to make it absolutely, indefensible, and to break the nexus of resistance between the regime in Damascus, the regime in Tehran, and Hezbollah. So much for this talk of this new moderate leader of Iran, Mr. Hassan Rouhani, who has rightly, I think he's quite alarmed at what is happening in Syria. So we will soon see how moderate he is, as the Western presses are very fond of telling us.
Okay, but when you say that they want to contain Iran, but if you again go back in history and see what they tried, they invaded Iraq, and there was a regime change, and now it's ruled by Nur al-Maliki, and the Sunni faction or sect, they are not really comfortable with it. So if you look at, and Iraq is almost supporting Syria in this, so how they are containing Iran when Iraq is supporting Syria? Obviously Iraq doesn't have that military power that it used to be earlier, but wherever they go, they try to change the regime. They have installed a regime, but it turns out to be different. How do you see it's happening?
Well, Iran, one of the success stories of the Iraq war was the role of Iran, because, Iran detested Saddam Hussein. They fought a very long war in the 1980s, which went on for 8 years, the so-called Gulf War, which actually bled both Iraq and Iran and didn't actually result in any win or loss. And, suddenly after the deposition of Saddam Hussein, Iran found itself in a very powerful position. And let me also say that the United States could not have policed Iraq or Afghanistan without a significant amount of help from Iran, because Afghanistan, it has Shias, the one of the dominant ethnicities in Afghanistan, the Hazaras, they are Shia. Similarly, the southern part of Iraq, in fact the majority in Iraq are Shias, and I think Shias were the major parties which found themselves winning these elections in Iraq, which were organized by the US occupation. So Iran has actually quietly been in a very powerful position, notwithstanding the anti-Semitic remarks of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. But I think this strategy of supporting regime change in Damascus is going to be very, very counterproductive, because I think you also know this last week, the National Security Archives released the extent to which the CIA was involved in the overthrow of the Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953, which is the event which has poisoned relations between Iran and the United States for almost half a century. So I'm at a loss to explain what this regime change, in my opinion, is going to be a disaster for not only U.S. foreign policy, if there is a U.S. foreign policy left in the Middle East, and it is going to involve, it will be a regional war, it will involve Iran, which is almost a nuclear power. It will obviously involve Hezbollah, and Lebanon will probably pay the price again, as it has frequently in the past, and it will involve Israel and Saudi Arabia, and also Russia, and because some of these countries have nuclear weapons, it could really blow up into a major conflagration. And Bashar Assad has even warned today that anyone who is thinking of attacking Syria and getting away with it is going to really get it. And even the Hezbollah chief has said that if any attempt is made to bomb Damascus, then we are going to really take it to Israel. So this is a big provocation for the United States.
I want to bring in Russia now. We have talked about Saudi, we have talked about Iran. What is the role of, is this time they're going to talk and talk and talk, or are they going to walk the walk as well? Because that's what we have seen in the past, that they are unable to do something, they just talk.
Well, unfortunately, for the last 20 years, Russia has been forced to talk the talk and not really walk the talk. But I think significantly now, after 20 years, this is the first time the Russians are actually behaving like a they were a dominant force in the Middle East during the Cold War. I think that Jamal Abdel Nasser, the great president of Egypt and the nationalist leader, he was an ally of the Soviet Union. And Syria, obviously, historically, have been allies of Soviet Union. So now I think Russia has got its big moment in the Middle East, and I must say Vladimir Putin is behaving responsibly, because they have actually moved some of their ships into the Mediterranean. And I think you have also heard Vladimir Putin say that should there be an attack on Damascus, then they would attack Saudi Arabia. So I think they, more than anybody else, in this conflict, they know
what is the interest of Russia in Syria? Why can't they ally with Saudi Arabia as well? They were, apparently they were offered $15 billion in recent weeks by Prince Bandar.
Yes, but you see, Russia itself is an oil-producing country, and as I mentioned before, Russia has long-standing relations with this part of the world. Under Jamal Abdel Nasser, when it was the Soviet Union, they were allies, including Syria, which has always been ruled by the Ba'ath Party. So it is just more than a few dollars of barrels of oil. And also, let me also say that I think Russia and China have the bitter experience of being duped over Libya. Remember that what the United States solicited the support of Russia and China, saying that they wanted a humanitarian intervention in Libya. But when the intervention actually turned out to destroy the country, get rid of Gaddafi, I think Russia and China felt really duped and cheated. So now they are saying, no, not again. We will not be cheated. And that is the reason, so it's not about economic interests. I think it's a mixture of their past history in the region, as well as the fact that, it's plain old superpower rivalry as well. I mean, Russia, obviously, it's a different country than 20 years ago when, the Soviet Union had just fallen. And, President George Bush Sr. proclaimed the rise of the New World Order. I think Russia is a different country now. It's a bit more assertive, a bit more proud. And, I mean...
And that has happened, I would say.
I
mean, if you second me, you can say that it has happened because of the leadership of Vladimir Putin, at least for almost 10 years we have seen in the past.
Yes, I mean, certainly Boris Yeltsin would not have dreamed of taking Russia in this direction. So I would say, irrespective of what the West says about Putin, I mean, they have something to say about every leader in the world. I think he is behaving quite maturely as far as this conflict. I mean, he's refusing to be provoked. I mean, let's not forget that Russia right now still has one of the largest militaries in the world.
In the world, indeed.
Obviously, we'll see what happens. So far, it's been all diplomatic. It's all been, reduced to talk.
Yeah. So, what's your final thoughts? What is about to happen? I mean, before you sign off, how do you see next 4 or 5 weeks?
Well, sorry.
How do you see the next 4 or 5 weeks? Is it going to get worse for Syria?
I wish I could be optimistic, but the past imperial pattern of the United States under Obama and even under his predecessors is not very strongly suggestive of the fact that I think they don't really care what the United Nations inspectors think or do. I mean, they basically use United Nations as an after-sales service. They go in, destroy the country, and then just ask United Nations to take over. So I'm sorry to say, I think what is going to happen is that they are going to decide unilaterally to go into that country. And it's not important now whether Bashar Assad ordered the chemical attack or whether the rebels. I think it became very convenient for the United States, when they saw that Bashar Assad is actually winning the war now. So they said, I think it's pretty obvious that they want to stop that. And I think the other effect is obviously to hamper the progress of the Arab Spring, which they began with the destruction of Libya. So I think they will go into that country, and obviously Syria is not Iraq. One thing which this invasion will do is to galvanize the whole population behind Bashar Assad. And obviously he is not Saddam.
Do you see it happening?
He's not a military guy.
You see it happening that.
Sorry.
I said, do you see it happening that if the military intervention is there, then population can rally behind Bashar al-Assad? Do you believe in that, or do you see it happening?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, who wants their country to be occupied? I mean, Saddam Hussein was a terrible dictator, but obviously when he was attacked, when the country was occupied, there was resistance. There was resistance from the Shias, there was resistance from the Sunnis, and obviously the only people who were collaborated were the Kurds. So, I think this is a very, natural fact. No one likes their country to be occupied, So yes, I think there will be resistance. And again, I'm saying Syria is not like Iraq, and it has also powerful friends who help Syria. Russia is helping Syria, Hezbollah obviously, and Iran obviously helping Syria militarily and also financially. So this is, if there is going to be war and it's going to be a full-fledged war, I think this will have a different outcome than what happened in Iraq. This could be a mess for years and years to come, and it could draw in all of the surrounding countries, and obviously I think we might see a return to the Cold War days, as some people are already saying, and it might not lead to the outcome which the West wants,
which was a full-scale
resignation of Bashar. I still think the best way out is to have a dialogue between the two and not to involve the.
I must say, which is again very wishful thinking. But thank you very much, Raza, for joining us from Pakistan at this very late hour, and hope to have you soon on another show. Thank you very much, viewers. We have talked about key stakeholders. We have talked about someone who is representing Syria, Dr. Haider. We have talked to someone who is based in Chicago and he's been writing about the policies of Pentagon and CIA. Now I want to move on to lesson learned, that if Pentagon or the Obama administration as well as Bush administration, they have learned any lessons from Afghanistan and Iraq war. So we're joined by Binish Javed, a reporter working for AR19 News, and she's been awarded a 2-month-long fellowship, and she's in Germany at the moment, and we'll talk to her about lessons learned of Afghanistan and Iraq war, and let's see what's her view on this from a Pakistani perspective. Assalamu alaikum, Binish, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much for joining us. Binish, tell us, obviously you've been in the field, you've been reporting, that how do you see the events unfolding in Syria? That is there any lessons which could have been learned in Afghanistan, and which?
Yes, actually, in last 10 years, we have closely watched the war on terror in Pakistan. From last 10 years, we are seeing that U.S. and international troops are fighting a war in Afghanistan. And I happened to travel to Kabul last year. And frankly speaking, I don't see any progress made in Afghanistan. After 10 years, what is the international troops asking for? Now they're asking for negotiations with Taliban. So they are now looking for a political solution in Afghanistan. So after all of that fighting, what's the end? They're still wanting to talk to Taliban. They're looking for a political solution. So I think that going for a war or attacking Syria is not going to solve the problem.
Okay, but Binish, I mean, I understand. I mean, I've spoken to Dr. Hala, Stephen Lendman, Raza Naeem. Everyone is against war. And we know this narrative that has been in the media. We have seen the Colin Powell speech in 2001, and we have seen Senator John Kerry's speech yet again, having the same rhetoric of war. But what can stop all of this? We know the lessons. Nothing is going to come out of this. But how is it possible?
I think the reason behind it's not that some country is worrying or some country is concerned about the 1,400 people that have died because of chemical attacks. It's not the people that these big powers are worried for. It's the game of influence. It's the game of power. So countries have to think that just because they want influence over Middle East, or they want to counter Iran, or they want to counter China, it's not going to help anybody. And I'm not talking against United States or talking against Syria. It's just that the world, we can even head to a World War III, and that is going to be devastating. The countries, the leadership needs to understand that it's the civilians, the innocent people that ultimately suffer. Look at Afghanistan. Look at Iraq. What has happened? The population, look at Pakistan. As a result of war on terror, 40,000 people have died in this war, fighting as an ally. Pakistan has been fighting as an ally of the United States, and we have suffered enormously. Look at our economy. Look at the number of people killed. I think that the only thing that, I think at right now, some countries that are saying that we should go by the United Nations, we should listen to what the United Nations is saying, it may be the right thing to do, because United Nations chief has also been reluctant in a military operation in Syria. So I think the best thing is that all of the countries in the world listen to.
Don't you think they have already have this preconceived notion? And as Raza was mentioning, I think, and I like the comment he made, that United Nations has merely been reduced to this after-sales service place. So you have done something, and then you go back to United Nations to just rectify it. Do you think
Yes.
they don't have to?
No.
I mean, they're not going to go to United Nations.
So that is the point. You know, Germany and many other countries are saying that let's go, let's listen to what United Nations is saying. So why not give United Nations a chance this time? And you know, and United States especially should not make any mistake. The mistake they did in Iraq when they, you know, after years it was found that there were no weapons of mass destruction. So what if United States hurries itself in Syria and things get out of control? I personally believe, and I strongly believe, that world is not going to become a better place. Syria is not going to become a peaceful place just because United States is going to target Bashar al-Assad's government. That is not going to happen. It's just that it's a power game ultimately. So all leadership of the world should you know, sit together in United Nations or an other platform, and there should be more people like me and like you and like other people who should strongly question that why there's that wars don't help any countries become prosperous or become peaceful or successful. We have seen in Afghanistan. Afghanistan is no better after 10 years. It's the same problems. Kabul, maybe Kabul has become more prosperous, more liberal, but then rest of Afghanistan, still so many provinces. In so many provinces, Taliban control those provinces. There is no writ of the government in those provinces.
And I think then this war is never contained, so Pakistan has suffered in the past, and obviously it will suffer after 2014 as well when NATO departs.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. We have seen the effects of war, and we are just a neighbor of Afghanistan. We are not Afghanistan ourselves, but we have seen how people suffer when there is war going on, and the entire Middle East can suffer. If there's an attack in Syria, it would be devastating. 1,400 people have died in chemical attacks or more. But if there's a military action in Syria, there will be thousands of killings.
Yes.
And who would be responsible for that? And then it will give, the worst thing that a war does is it gives youth, the young people, the chance to radicalize. Because that is exactly what has happened in Iraq, that has happened in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda and these terrorist organizations, you give an opportunity to them. Syria is different because it's said that, you know, who United States is supporting. It's supporting Al-Qaeda or because, you know, Al-Qaeda is basically fighting with Bashar al-Assad's government. So who will become more powerful? And you will give a chance to the youth, the population, the young population of the country to be radicalized. They will become more radical in their thinking, and the world will become more anti-American. And I think the U.S. should keep this in mind, that countries like Pakistan and Muslim countries throughout the world will become more anti-American if United States goes and attacks Syria.
Okay, so the last question before you go. So, I mean, in larger perspective, do you think the lessons which could have been learned from Afghanistan and Iraq war, Pentagon and CIA, they don't want to learn anything from it? They can see, obviously, but they don't want to learn anything due to their own vested interests.
I also think that, you know, if we look at history of United States, presidents do want to do something that will make them important. And if we look at what President Obama has done, we don't see anything significant. And there's so much happening. The Snowden case, and how the United States is supporting the military in Egypt, and all of war on Syria or attack on Syria, you know, would to just divert attention of the world from those events.
So we also have to keep that in mind, because Egypt is important. And what is happening in Egypt as a result of the coup, the military coup, which the entire of, like a lot of Muslim countries in the world and Muslim population believes that the Egyptian military was supported by United States. So we have to keep looking at what is happening in Egypt. And if there is an attack in Syria, the entire world's attention will go to Syria, and people will
So
forget
basically,
what's happening in
everything
Egypt.
there are events in the Middle East which will determine our future as well, going all the way from Afghanistan to Iran and to Pakistan. Okay. Thank you very much, Binish, for joining us from Germany. And also would like to thank Raza Naeem from Pakistan, Stephen Linman from Chicago, and Dr. Hala from Leicester once again. Viewers, we all agreed that war is not a solution, and we hope and wish that this regional conflict is solved with a political will and it leads to a political solution. With this hope and prayers, as always, kam humko na de siwaye gam shabbir, shabbir ka gam baant raha hai to idhar de. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad.